Hello everyone, it's Tanny Games here. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about the four, I would say, front-running villains that could potentially come to Wishblossom Ranch. Now, I did film this already, but we had a bit of a discussion about it on stream, and so I'm kind of refilming it. I am refilming it. I figured it was only right to do it. I did debate about refilming my predictions for 2026, but I decided I wouldn't do that. I didn't want to... too much effort. Basically, I would have to delete it. I'd have to re-upload it. It'd be a bit of a rush for editing. So I was like, okay, let's just leave that. And I thought I would refilm this though, because I realized there was a few things that I didn't kind of include and things like that. So I just thought it was better to do it on a clean slate, so to speak. But basically, I'm gonna talk about the four villains that I've seen mentioned most in the community, whether it's on Reddit, Facebook, Discord, on streams, just generally. We're gonna go over them. I'm gonna list the reasons why people have made those connections, and then at the end of this video you can decide where you sit and what you think. Now, ultimately, at the end of the day, when it comes to the predictions for Wishblossom Ranch, obviously we're thinking of patterns, we're thinking of clues, we're thinking of hints and nods and things like that. So all of that stuff kind of goes into the theory side of it. But at the end of the day, Gameloft can do whatever they want. And it may be that of these four villains, maybe it's none of them. Maybe it is none at all. But I'm going to go through them all, and then, as I said, you come to your own conclusions. I'm sure you already have. But let's begin with the Evil Queen. Now, the Evil Queen was a villain that I did think of initially. She was one of my very early day predictions before we got the Wishblossom Ranch teaser. So before we had the teaser, as in like the trailer, all we had was the end of Storybook Vale teaser, and that end of Storybook Vale teaser is what led me to think we were getting the Evil Queen, along with some of the tapestries we had and things like that. So she was initially my front runner. She was the person that I thought was going to come. The reasons for this is, first of all, the fact that we had the Snow White tapestry. That was one of the tapestries that were shown for Storybook Vale, the next part. So I felt that was a big indicator of who was coming. Now, the fact that we're getting Snow White could be why we got that tapestry teaser. It could be that that was actually pointing to Snow White and not to the Evil Queen anymore. So I don't know whether I should include it in the list or not, because technically that could have been just a hint towards Snow White, but I'll just mention it anyway because it could still count for the Evil Queen. Now, of course, another reason why the Evil Queen is considered is because she is the counterpart to Snow. So she is the enemy to Snow. So that puts her in kind of line with how Storybook Vale had their dynamic of Maleficent and Aurora. So if we're getting Snow, could we then get the Evil Queen if they want to copy that Storybook Vale pattern and dynamic? Now, of course, another suggestion is actually about the ranch building that we have in the trailers. There's kind of like a ranch type castle, which does look vaguely similar to the Snow White castle. So I do think it kind of could potentially be what her castle is. You know, we saw Maleficent's castle, so could this be that this castle is the villain's castle? Are they following that dynamic? I'm not 100% sure. It's hard to say, because obviously with Storybook Vale, the true villain of Storybook Vale was the Lawkeeper. And obviously we did see the library, which is where the Lawkeeper resides. But in this one, is the Evil Queen gonna live in the ranch? Is she gonna be there from the get-go? Who knows? Or is she gonna have her own biome? Or is the villain gonna have their own biome, I should say, that is separate and away? I don't know. It could go either way, but obviously this ranch building does feel a bit similar to the castle structure that they have in the Snow White movie. Now, another reason why I think the Evil Queen has a strong possibility is that I would say she's quite an in-demand character, or at least she's a high popularity character. In terms of like the big villains, obviously the Evil Queen is one of the most iconic Disney villains. So I do think in terms of like ratings, if people were gonna list in order like who they want first going down, I think Evil Queen would be up there quite high for the majority of people. Not saying she would be top of the list, but just saying she would be in the like the higher end of the scale rather than the lower end, I would think, for the majority of players. Of course I could be wrong, but just based on sort of general community feedback and stuff like that, I would say that she's definitely an iconic villain that people will be looking forward to getting into the game. Now I think that about wraps it up for the predictions for Evil Queen. Obviously quite a few reasons there that it could be her, so you make up your own mind. As I said, she was one of my front runners from the beginning. I am a little bit kind of like back and forth. I think I would have stuck with Evil Queen more if they hadn't disclosed that we were only getting 4 characters. Because they've said that we're only getting 4 characters, I'm kind of hesitant to think she's coming, because I just feel like it doesn't make sense for the rest of the world of what we've seen for Wishblossom Ranch. So yeah, that's just my thought. She was my forefront like big villain that I was predicting, but I think she's dropped down just because of some of the teasers we've seen within the trailer. Now our next villain to discuss is Hans. Now Hans is probably, I would say the community's divided mostly 50-50. I said this in my first video that I think perhaps 30% of the community is behind Hans, another 30% is behind the next prediction, and then the rest of the community is split between Evil Queen and another villain, or other villains I should say, that we will get to. So Hans I think is one of the popular suggestions. Now when it comes to Hans, some of the reasons why we could see him is that firstly we have quite a bit of Scandinavian influence within the ranch. Snow White doesn't necessarily tie to Scandinavia. She does sort of apply to European influence. So if the Scandinavian was meant to be more vague and more European based, that could probably be the connection to Snow rather than to another character. However, a lot of people are obviously pointing out we have the Swedish Dala horse. So for a more direct biome to villain connection, Hans would make sense. And I do get that. I do agree. I do think the Scandinavian connection is a very, very strong connection. And so it would make sense. It would make sense, to be honest. And I do see that. I think that's a very, very valid point of discussion for Hans. Now, another reason why people are suspecting Hans is because he owns a horse. So out of all of the forerunning kind of villains, I do believe Hans is the only one that actually has a direct connection to a horse. So that's why he's a very popular choice, because of the fact that he does own a horse as a villain. Whereas there aren't really many other villains. I mean, some villains do have horses, I want to say that, but not every villain owns a horse. And certainly the forefront sort of people, I would say, are not necessarily horse owners, basically. So yeah, he owns a horse, which gives him a bit more of a tick in his corner. Now, the next reason why a lot of people point it out is because he features for a 2-second clip in the Frozen Fever short, and we see him in a horse stable. So a lot of people are saying because he was pictured in this horse stable, it means he has this really strong connection to horses, and it means that with a ranch DLC, it could only be Hans. Now, this is something that I struggle a bit more with because it's a clip that's made for humor. I don't think it's necessarily like it's not a large background of his character. It's not like he's heavily shown to be running stables all the time. Like in the original Frozen movie, he's not there halfway through the movie, like with a ranch and stuff like that. Do you know what I mean? I feel like it's just a coincidence of location kind of thing, rather than any true connection to his character. Like, it's not like he was a stable owner and traded horses or ran in horse races. Like, none of that is really suggested with his character. It's just that he's out there shoveling poop and it's just a bit of a coincidence. I think it's a scene added for comedic effect. It's a reason to put him outside for the comedic effect of this scene in this short. So I'm not sure it's really relevant to him as a character, which is why I struggle to see this connection. I feel like it's a very, very thin connection. Like, I don't think it's strong enough of a connection, but I do understand why people are saying it. And that is a big reason. I think the biggest reason I've seen people list for Hans being the villain is because of that Frozen Fever snippet that we see. Now, of course, another thing that we do have to mention, we did mention that the evil queen could come because of how she is a counterpart to Snow and it copies the Storybook Fails dynamic. Well, of course, the other side is true, that this update could follow the Rift in Time dynamic of completely unrelated characters. So at the moment, we only have 2 DLCs. It's not enough to form a true strong pattern. We can hope there's going to be patterns. We can hope there's going to be similarities. However, it's not guaranteed. It's not set in stone. So if we assume it's going to be like Rift in Time, then of course having a villain that's completely unrelated to the base game characters, not the base game characters, the DLC characters, the non-villain DLC characters. If we follow that pattern, then Hans would tie in because he could follow that Rift in Time dynamic. So that, I guess, is another point in his court. Now, Hans is a very popular choice. I can see it. I don't think Hans is very high up in the demands of characters. I don't think he has that same appeal that Evil Queen has, but maybe we could see him. Maybe we could see him. Now let's talk about the next option, which is my suggestion. Again, I could very well be wrong. We don't know. But my thoughts are that we will either get Ralph or we will get King Candy. I have a feeling we're going to get Ralph more so than King Candy, but I've lumped them together. It's basically Wreck-It Ralph universe. But yeah, I kind of lean towards Ralph. And my main reason for this is the Candy biome tie-in. Now, this is something that I've spoken about before, is that a lot of the sort of villains, you know, they do have their connected tie-in biome. And with the sneak preview of a Candy type biome, I think it makes sense for the villain to be from Wreck-It Ralph. I can't think of any other Candy associated characters in the Disney universe. When we think about Maleficent's arrival, how she came into the game, she had Ever After. That was her biome. It was styled on fairy tales. It was styled on that kind of fairy-esque biome, that magical vibe. Ever After is based off of Maleficent. Mythopia is based off of Hades. The Lawkeeper, which we now know is a villain, has like the Bind and the Library. That is her tie-in. When we have Jafar, he had the glittering dunes, he had Agrabah. When the villains come to the DLC, they always have an associated biome. And I think the candy biome means that we could get a candy villain. I tried to think about it in the eyes of Winnie the Pooh, and I just don't see us getting our big bad to be a Heffalump or a Woozle. It's just not going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think there's a big enough villain to drive Winnie the Pooh, like to have as a Winnie the Pooh villain. It just, to me, doesn't exist. So that's why I've written off the Winnie the Pooh biome. As I said, I think the ranch is more of a like European influence. They do say Scandinavian in one of the interviews. So again, I guess I understand, like I said, with the tie-in with the ranch for Hans. But I do think it's more generic European. They talk about the Alpine mountains. So the Alps is like, that's not Scandinavia. So again, you can see it's this kind of cross Europe influence. It's not just one space, which is why I think the candy biome is stronger than the Scandinavian influence in the ranch. But I don't know. I'll let you guys decide, chat amongst yourselves. But yeah, I think that ties in well to it being Ralph or King Candy, because we need a biome to reflect the villain, because that's something that they have always done. Now, another thing I want to say is that I do think Ralph is a bit of an in-demand character. I don't think he's an in-demand character the same way Evil Queen is. I think Evil Queen is iconic and influential in that sense. She's like kind of like a main villain roster character. But Ralph, I think, is popular because he featured in the very first trailer for the game. He's a character that is in demand because he hasn't arrived yet. And so people regularly go, where's Ralph? Where's Ralph? When are we getting Ralph? Ralph when? So I think he's in demand just because of the fact that it's taken him so long to come to the game. A bit like Cinderella. People were always like, where's Cinderella? She was in the first trailer. Why haven't we got Cinderella? And Ralph fits into that same kind of category of being in demand because people have been waiting since the beginning for him. So I do think he's in demand. I just want to stress, I don't think he's in demand the same way that Evil Queen is. They're sort of in demand for different reasons. Now, of course, like we said with Hans, how he follows a rift in time dynamic of unrelated characters, Ralph would also follow suit. He would also have that rift in time dynamic of unrelated characters. So I do think there's a strong chance for him to come to the game if we were going down that route and reason and theory, because he obviously is unrelated to Tinkerbell, to Snow White, to Maximus, and potentially a Winnie the Pooh character if that is indeed who we get. Now, my next theory is that obviously we know there's going to be obstacle courses for the horses. They have talked about this, how there's going to be tracks and things like that. When I think of tracks, horse obstacle courses, what else ties in nicely? A racetrack. We could absolutely have a racetrack which stands in for a horse track as well. We could have that kind of racetracky biome, which would be fun to adventure down for horses and would kind of make sense creatively to have like a track that blends in more to its surroundings rather than just being directly set up for horses. It's kind of like a natural environment racetrack, if that makes sense. So I like the idea of that. I like the idea of something that can tie the biomes to the horses, which is a big appeal of this DLC. Even the developers have said it, like horses are kind of at the forefront of this. So yeah, I could absolutely see a racetrack being interchangeable for a horse racetrack as well. Now, another theory, much like the Evil Queen, when we look at the castle in Wreck-It Ralph that King Candy lives in, which obviously must have been Vanellope's castle to begin with, that does actually have a similar design as well to the ranch building. Not in colorway, but certainly in terms of shape. So again, if we're making the connection of the large ranch building being some kind of connection, then perhaps the fact that the Wreck-It Ralph universe castle is similar to this ranch style building could be a potential reason why we could have Ralph or King Candy. Now, another thing that I want to add, which I didn't know until we did my stream the other night and we were discussing it and we played through some of the quests, is that apparently there's been a lot of mockery of Vanellope's house recently. I mean, Peter Pan had his quest where he's devouring Vanellope's house. Cogsworth makes comments about Vanellope's house. We know Vanellope's house has been a sticking point in the community ever since she was introduced. A lot of people seem to hate her house. I love her house for what it is. Like, as her house, I think it's perfect. However, I do agree that we don't have nearly enough stuff to properly decorate for her. And something that was requested when she first came into the game, that was said in almost every single Reddit post, like, people demanded that we got a candy biome. A candy biome has been something that has been long requested by the community. So therefore, bringing into a candy biome into Wishblossom Ranch would fulfill that much demanded need. So again, I kind of think because of the way Vanellope's been used recently in the base game and the mockery, I kind of think this push towards a candy biome for her is something that we could see happening. So just because we've had that base game kind of push about Vanellope and stuff like that, I do wonder if that's a nod to potential future for DLC, for future concepts and stuff like that. Now, my last reason for the Ralph and King Candy is that we know what takes over, what has an impact on this world, is the decay. Now, when we think of a rift in time, obviously what happened was the rift in time. The rift in time, which was caused by Jafar and his gem thing and stuff like that. So there was trouble that was caused by Jafar. So the decay has to tie to the villain. And we do know that the decay has been talked about in terms of the ranch running down and yada yada. So we know that's kind of been discussed. And one thing that was mentioned on my stream, I didn't catch it originally. And at first when it was mentioned, I thought it was done as a joke. But I actually 100% agree. The idea that decay can relate to tooth decay and candy, like the decay being caused from this sweet generating area kind of thing, this candy biome, the decay coming from that source, from someone who's accidentally wrecked the ranch, I just think is such a strong connection and really works. So yeah, I really like that connection of the decay and tooth decay, kind of like a 2-in-1 joke. Obviously we did have the lawkeeper with the ink as well, so again, that direct connection to the villain. So I feel like the decay has to have a direct connection to the villain in some way. Now obviously it doesn't have to be direct to their character. A rift in time doesn't have any direct link to Jafar. It's just more of the storytelling within that DLC. So somehow the other characters need to have some connection to decay, of how they can cause a decay, and I just think the Ralph connection is probably the strongest. Actually, another thing I want to point out, I forgot to add this. I need to add this. Obviously we do need to talk about Ralph and his character. So Ralph in the movie is a villain. He has an overarching hero storyline. He becomes the hero, but in his own game, Ralph is a villain. And even in the second movie, Ralph is like the villain of that movie. He is the forefront. There is this rift between him and Vanellope and stuff like that. He is constantly central to these things, even though in the first Wreck-It Ralph movie, King Candy becomes the ultimate villain because he's the one that's caused trouble in Sugar Rush and stuff like that. Like, he's the villain that's entered the Sugar Rush and kind of all that. But technically, Ralph is a villain in his own game. And then obviously he has this hero arc where he becomes the hero and he defeats King Candy. Now, obviously one of the things that Ralph does is he wrecks it. He says, I'm gonna wreck it. That ties in directly to a ranch running down. What if he accidentally destroys the ranch? He's trying to take care of the ranch. It was in his care. He was meant to look after it. And then he accidentally wrecked it and the decay happened and things like that. Like, I can see these being tied together because of accidents. And we could very much have his storyline reflect his movie, where he starts off the villain and becomes the hero. He steps up and he becomes a hero. He goes through that position of being a villain to being the hero. And I think there would be a great parallel there. And we were talking about it on stream, about the kind of parallels as well with The Forgotten, with that kind of storyline of a villain and then redemption, of earning trust, of becoming redeemed. And I think Ralph would play in with that really nicely as well. So I did want to just add that point in there as well. Now, our last villain that I've seen mentioned quite a lot of times is Magnifico. Magnifico, however you say it. Because he has a direct tie into wishes. Now, something that none of the other villains have is a wish connection. None of the villains have a wish connection. Now, I do want to say, I think there is a connection to wishes with Snow White, because obviously she wishes in the well. Oh, I'm getting so tongue twisted with this wishes. But yeah, so she does have technically a direct connection really there. But yeah, Magnifico is probably the only villain that has that direct wish-like tie-in, because obviously it's what he's centered around, is wishes. So if we wanted to make Wishblossom Ranch tied to a villain, Magnifico has that. He does have that strong wish connection. I think this is why a lot of people have been theorizing about Genie coming in, because of the fact that Genie can grant wishes. Now, I personally think Genie's going to show up and he will be in a biome that's more like holiday vibes. I forget what they say with him being away. He's on his travels, and I just feel like he would travel to somewhere tropical. I don't know. Maybe it's because of the movie. Maybe because of the movie, he does the whole, like, he's dressed up to go to, like, Disneyland or Disney World or whatever. Like, maybe I'm just thinking he's holidaying. He's taking a break. He's relaxing. He's not going to a ranch and going to work kind of thing. He's traveling and relaxing. But maybe that's just like a theory in my head kind of thing. So yeah, like, people have obviously mentioned Genie because of the wish tie-in, which I think is very fair. Even if I don't think he's coming. But yeah, Magnifico does have that tie-in to Wish. So I think that makes him strong. To be fair, that's why before we knew Snow was coming, I did have Asha in my list of, like, princesses that could turn up, because she has a direct tie to wishes as well. So I definitely think there's validity with the Magnifico theory because of that reason. And of course, Magnifico also follows the same Rift in Time dynamic of completely unrelated characters to the base game. You know, not the base game. I keep saying base game. To the base characters in the DLC, the characters we know, the announced characters, Snow and Tink. But yeah, obviously he follows that dynamic as well. So I do think there is also a connection there. Now, I might be wrong, but I think he does ride a horse in the movie. So that would also be a sticking point in his thing, because he would then also own a horse, much like Hans. So yeah, I think there is reasons for him as well, but I think he's probably the weakest of all the theories, just based on listing reasons as to why. Another person who has been mentioned is Cruella, and I think just because she has the animal tie-in, but I don't really see her get mentioned as much. She's probably like the 5th character, but again, I think it's a very vague connection, kind of like as a villain, just because she hates animals. Well, she doesn't hate animals, she just loves their fur. She loves their fur. But yeah, like, I think to me, she's a less popular choice based on the community. And again, that's a very vague connection. I think certainly Evil Queen, Hans, and Ralph have the strongest chances based on like deciding on theories and things like that and what we could see. But yeah, those are my thoughts anyway, and what I've seen generally being discussed from the community. If there's any other points that I've missed, make sure to link them but leave them down below. I think I've covered the main theories that I have seen floating around in the community for why we should get any of those characters. But now I've listed the reasons. What do you think? Has your mind changed? Are you still set with whoever you predicted before? Let me know in the comments down below what you think. I would absolutely love to hear from you. I'm very, very excited for the Wishblossom Ranch reveals. I cannot wait. Cannot wait to see what's revealed, regardless of whether I'm right or wrong. I'm just so excited to find out. And it's Disney, and I love Disney, so I'm sure no matter what we get, I'll be very, very happy. I'll be happy regardless. But yeah, let me know your thoughts. Don't forget to give a like if you enjoyed the video. Feel free to subscribe for more Disney Dreamlight Valley content. And I do hope I get to see you all in the next one. Bye, guys! A huge shout out to our super top members, Spread Lake and Caroline Rose. Thank you so much for the additional support on my channel. It does mean so much to me. So thank you very much.